Part 2. Our Descent into Dietary Madness. Chapter 6. The Perils of Processed Foods, Inflammation and Oxidative Stress. Mental power cannot be got from ill-fed brains. Herbert Spencer, Principles of Ethics. As powerful and sophisticated as your brain's infrastructure is, it is also extraordinarily fragile, and therefore must be carefully protected if you are to enjoy a lifetime of excellent mental health. Fortunately, Mother Nature has already gone to great lengths to do this for you. She enclosed your brain in a thick layer of bone and triple wrapped it in membranes to buffer it against physical injury. She even cordoned off its blood supply with a discriminating barrier system to filter out germs and other threatening substances. These ancient evolutionary safeguards lend the brain an air of invincibility, but they are no match for our modern food environment. What distinguishes today's destructive diets from all those that preceded it? Certainly not the presence of red meat and saturated fat, both of which we've been consuming since time immemorial, but refined carbohydrates and refined vegetable oils. These are the true signature ingredients of the standard American diet, and they have found their way into nearly every processed food on the market. Both of these substances are powerful promoters of excessive oxidative stress and inflammation, two of the driving forces behind the brain diseases we fear most, from depression to dementia and everything in between. Processing the word processed. Unlike most creatures that simply walk, fly, or swim up to a living plant or animal and swallow it whole, we humans process most plants and animals before we eat them, and have been doing so for millennia. Strictly speaking, anything we do to a plant or animal to fundamentally alter its chemical structure before we consume it, including cooking, is considered food processing. So where do we draw the line? Is all food processing bad, or is some degree of processing acceptable? Our love affair with food processing began with the advent of fire hundreds of thousands of years ago, which got our ancestors cooking. After that, nothing much changed on the food preparation scene until some 14,000 years ago, well before the dawn of agriculture, when ancient Jordanians began grinding roots and grains into flour to make bread. And 7,000 years ago, people on the Adriatic coast of Croatia began curdling milk and straining off the liquid whey through clay sieves to create cheese. Processing methods can change foods both for better and for worse. For example, grilling meat destroys some of its vitamins, but also kills potentially harmful bacteria that may be lurking on its surface. Similarly, boiling vegetables destroys some of their vitamins, but also reduces their toxicity and makes them easier to digest. Grinding grains improves our access to their nutrients, but also to their carbohydrates, leading to greater blood sugar spikes. However, since these time-honored techniques improved the safety, digestibility, or longevity of whole foods, their nutritional advantages largely outweighed their risks. Perhaps this would be a reasonable place to draw the line between good and bad processing. Processing methods with a net benefit to human health? Good. Processing methods with a net risk to human health? Bad. Turning whole foods like beets into pure sugar and converting sunflower seeds into pure oil strips them of their nutritional advantages, leaving us with products that are all risk and no benefit. What are ultra-processed foods? The Industrial Revolution would forever change the nature and purpose of food processing. At first, new machines like rolling mills and new methods like pasteurization simply improved on pre-existing food processing methods. But as we entered the 20th century, the food industry gradually moved beyond safety, preservation, and nutritional quality to focus its efforts on convenience, palatability, and profit. We now live in an era of ultra-processed products that would be wholly unrecognizable to our ancestors as food. The Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations describes ultra-processing this way. It starts with the fractioning of whole foods into substances, including sugars, oils, and fats, proteins, starches, and fiber. Some of these substances are then submitted to hydrolysis or hydrogenation or other chemical modifications. Subsequent processes involve the assembly of unmodified and modified food substances with little, if any, whole food, using industrial techniques such as extrusion, molding, and pre-frying. Colors, flavors, emulsifiers, and other additives are frequently added to make the final product palatable or hyper-palatable. Ultra-processed foods make up nearly 40% of what Australians choose to consume, about 50% of the food families in the UK purchase, and more than 60% of what Americans buy at the grocery store. These products are so pervasive that you could probably lay your hands on one right now without leaving your home, car, or workplace, although some of them are easier to recognize than others. Twinkies and Doritos? Clearly ultra-processed. But what about Cliff Bars and Hidden Valley Ranch dressing? These have a natural air about them, but try making them at home, and you'll struggle to find enough soy protein isolate or artificial flavors in your kitchen to finish the job. Most modern processed foods are so nutrient poor that they can't be considered foods at all. So even the terms junk food and ultra-processed food give them more credit than they deserve. Some say products like these are bad for us because they provide nothing more than empty calories. But this is a dangerously inaccurate statement. Think of it this way. As the storied myth goes, the people of Troy welcomed through their city gates what appeared to be a magnificent hollow wooden horse, abandoned by the Greek army during the Trojan War. But hiding inside were Greek soldiers that would lay siege to their city. Processed food is the Trojan horse of human health. These products may look innocent and delicious, but concealed within their pleasing packaging are ingredients with the power to destroy your good mental and physical health. Yes, these products are empty in that they lack nutrients. So empty that manufacturers have to enrich them with nutrients that their factories have stripped away, or fortify them with nutrients they never had to begin with. Yet, propping them up with vitamins and minerals does nothing to address the fact that they are brimming with toxic molecules that damage your brain's structure and metabolism over time, ultimately compromising its ability to generate energy. Refined carbohydrates. The term refined carbohydrates encompasses a great variety of sweet and starchy ingredients. But the king and queen of this realm unquestionably are flour and sugar. The addition of flour to the human menu happened well before written language could record its impact on society. So for a closer look at the power an exciting new source of refined carbohydrates can wield over the human spirit, we'll consider the more recent tale of sugar. The bitter history of sugar. As Professor Khalil Gibran Muhammad wrote in an article for the New York Times Magazine, granulated sugar made its debut about 2,500 years ago in India. But harvesting and boiling sugar cane down into crystals was so labor-intensive that sugar remained a rare delicacy until the 1600s, when Europeans began enslaving human beings from sub-Saharan Africa to toil on sugar plantations in the West Indies, Mexico, Central America, and South America. Satisfying elite appetites for this white gold would ultimately lead to the bondage of millions upon millions of people. This horrific history alone should be enough to convince us all that sugar is not a food, but an addictive drug, much like tobacco, which has a similarly barbaric past. This ugly chapter in human history made sugar available to the wealthy Westerners of the 1700s. But as science journalist Gary Taubes writes in his book, The Case Against Sugar, it would take the machinery of the Industrial Revolution to convert sugar into an affordable everyday staple for everyone everywhere. The Industrial Revolution, inaugurated by Watt's steam engine in 1765, transformed sugar production and refining just as it did virtually every other existing industry in the 19th century. By the 1920s, sugar refineries were producing as much sugar in a single day, millions of pounds, as would have taken refineries in the 1820s an entire decade. Defining refined carbohydrates. All refined carbohydrates begin life as components of whole plant foods, grains, legumes, fruits, or vegetables, which are then refined into sugars and starches using various industrial processing methods. Refined sugars are easy to identify. With the exception of honey and fruit juice, any syrup, liquid, crystal, or powder that contains carbohydrate and tastes sweet is refined, including agave syrup, coconut sugar, molasses, and even maple syrup. It takes 43 gallons of maple sap, which is very low in sugar, to make 1 gallon of maple syrup. Most processed foods, including most savory foods like soups, salad dressings, and hot entrees, taste sweet and are full of sugar, even if sugar isn't one of the first ingredients. Manufacturers know that some consumers are trying to avoid products high in sugar, so they've created dozens of slightly different forms of sugar and sprinkled them throughout their ingredient lists. In his book, Metabolical, pediatric endocrinologist Dr. Robert Lustig points out that by choosing different sugars as the 5th, 6th, 7th, and 8th ingredients, sugar can rapidly add up to be the dominant ingredient. How many names for sugar can you find in this ingredient label for a popular name brand breakfast bar? Whole wheat flour, invert sugar, whole grain oats, corn syrup, soybean oil, sugar, vegetable glycerin, enriched wheat flour, soluble corn fiber, apple puree concentrate, dextrose, and fructose. The answer is that 7 of these 12 ingredients are refined sugars, and 2 of the 5 remaining ingredients are refined grains. So 3/4 of all ingredients are refined carbohydrates. Sugar's many aliases. The food processing industry uses more than 60 different names for sugar. To help you identify and avoid added sugars in your diet, there is a list of the most common types of sugar in the accompanying PDF, but a few examples include juices, dextrins, nectars, crystals, and syrups. Also, don't be seduced by flowery descriptions such as coconut blossom sugar or healthy-sounding adjectives like organic fair trade. Sugar is still sugar. The whole truth about whole grains. Many of us have become savvy about identifying refined sugars, but refined starches, which come from root vegetables and grains, can be more challenging to recognize. Root starches, like potato starch and cassava flour, are straightforward because they are all thoroughly refined into powders. But refined grains are confusing because they can be refined to varying degrees. White flour is clearly a refined carbohydrate, but what about whole grain Cheerios, stone ground rye bread, and brown rice pasta? If you've ever been confused about what a whole grain is, you are not alone. Truly whole grains are intact kernels, complete with their outer bran coating. Simple as that. Once the grain is broken into pieces by any kind of processing, it is considered refined to some extent. The tinier the resulting particles, the more refined the grain. Particle size matters because the smaller the particles, the easier they are to digest, and the faster your blood sugar will rise after you eat them. Some processing methods produce large coarse particles, such as cracked wheat and steel-cut oats, that still contain all the grain's original components, whereas other processing methods produce ultra-fine powders, such as wheat flour and cornstarch, that have had all of the fiber and most of the nutrients stripped away. To make matters more confusing, there are some refining methods that don't involve cutting or grinding at all. Examples include polishing, white rice, pressure rolling, rolled oats, and extrusion puffing, puffed wheat. These techniques break down or remove the bran coating of grains, resulting in products that are easier to digest. But the most insidious reason for widespread confusion about whole grains may be the USDA's definition of whole grains. Whole grains consist of the entire grain seed, usually called the kernel. The kernel is made of 3 components: the bran, germ, and endosperm. For food products to be labeled whole grain, they must contain the same proportions of bran, germ, and endosperm as the original whole grain. This absurd policy allows processed food manufacturers to blast a kernel of wheat to smithereens and still call it whole, so long as they add the right ratio of its bits back into the product. To say that this is an unconventional definition of the word whole would be an understatement. Manufacturers are invested in using the term whole grain on their product packaging because whole grains are supposed to be healthier than refined grains, and there is plenty of human clinical trial evidence to support this view. Dozens of randomized controlled trials have shown that refined grain products like instant oats and rice pasta lead to higher peaks in blood glucose and insulin levels after meals than traditional oats and brown rice. The problem with refined sugars and starches. Your body breaks down the carbohydrates in every food you eat, whether it's sweet or starchy, whole or refined, into glucose. Since bananas and cotton candy both turn into identical glucose molecules, why does it make a difference which one you eat? As omnivores, we naturally possess the capacity to eat plant foods like fruits and root vegetables and break their sugars and starches down into glucose. But our physiology never expected to be deluged with large quantities of concentrated carbohydrates multiple times per day throughout our lives. Our prehistoric ancestors may have consumed fruit juice, but it's unlikely they drank significant amounts of it on a regular basis because most fruits are difficult to juice without special equipment. How long might it take to make even a single cup of apple juice by hand? And fruits that are easy to juice, like citrus fruits, were historically too sour to be enjoyable. There is evidence that some of our prehistoric ancestors used stones to grind grain, but it's difficult to imagine them using that crude technique to produce much flour, let alone the 133 pounds of flour per year that the average American consumes. The reason why fresh fruits and vegetables are better for you than candy is that their sugars and starches exist within a fiber matrix, so it takes your body more time to access them and break them down into glucose. They also contain water, vitamins, and minerals, so they're more nourishing and more satisfying. More than 30 randomized controlled trials have found refined carbohydrates to be less filling and less satisfying, and to leave people hungrier than unrefined carbohydrates. Becoming savvy about refined carbohydrates means reading labels carefully to look for sugars, flours, syrups, powdered starches, and fruit juice concentrates. Examples of foods high in refined carbohydrates include any products made with grain flour. The grain family includes wheat, corn, rice, oats, barley, rye, buckwheat, amaranth, spelt, and millet. Nearly all breads, baked goods, wraps, crackers, pastas, tortillas, and breakfast cereals are made from refined grain flour, even if the label says they are made with whole grains. Products containing hidden refined starches. Most hot and cold breakfast cereals are made from refined grains, including rolled oats, cream of wheat, granola, and bran cereals. Rare exceptions include unsweetened whole grain muesli and cereals made entirely from unsweetened, sprouted whole grains. Most gravies, sauces, soups, and stews are thickened with wheat flour or cornstarch. Refined corn products, grits, cornbread, polenta, nachos, and corn chips. Refined rice products, rice cakes, rice wrappers, and white rice. Crunchy snacks made from powdered root starches, vegetable straws, cassava chips, potato sticks, etc. Many French fries are now coated with wheat starch, dextrin, or other refined carbohydrates to increase crispiness. Products containing hidden sugars. Many milk substitutes, such as soy milk and oat milk, are sweetened with sugar. Most salad dressings, marinades, barbecue sauces, ketchups, and relishes contain sugar. Most smoothies are high in simple sugars like pureed fruit, fruit juice, sugar, or honey. Dried fruit snack products such as fruit rolls, fruit gummies, and fruit bars. Some dried fruits are routinely coated in sugar, such as dried cranberries, blueberries, and pineapples. All liqueurs and sweet wines contain sugar. Questionable items. Minimally processed, no added sugar, but still high in simple sugars or starches. Fruit juices, dried fruit, pureed fruit, such as applesauce. Unsweetened milk substitutes made from grains, such as oat milk and rice milk. Chips made from sliced root vegetables, potato chips, beet chips, plantain chips, carrot chips, etc. And popcorn, puffed rice, and other puffed grains. Refined products like sugars, flours, and juices are essentially concentrated sources of pre-digested carbohydrate that have had their fiber and nutrients stripped away. These naked carbohydrates turn instantly into glucose in your digestive tract and are rapidly absorbed into your circulation, resulting in steeper glucose and insulin spikes in your bloodstream. Remember, every time your blood sugar spikes, your brain sugar spikes right along with it. And therein lies the problem. High blood glucose, hyperglycemia, is toxic to cells. This glucotoxicity explains why people with type 2 diabetes, a disease of persistently high blood glucose levels, risk serious damage to every part of their body, from the blood vessels in their eyes to the nerves in their feet. Hyperglycemia has the power to destroy every organ you possess, and the brain is no exception. Concentrating, remembering, and processing information depends on lightning-fast electrical signaling between neurons. When neurons are awash in glucose, they transmit signals more slowly, which may help to explain why people with high blood sugar levels experience brain fog. But how does excess sugar destroy brain cells? Oxidative stress and inflammation, the brain under attack. High glucose levels jeopardize brain health by promoting excessive oxidation and inflammation. Surplus sugar gloms onto the proteins, fats, and even the DNA strands inside your cells, disfiguring and crippling them beyond repair. These sticky, disabled molecules are called advanced glycation end products, or AGEs, an appropriate term since they are notorious for accelerating the aging process. If you've ever had a hemoglobin A1C blood test to look for signs of type 2 diabetes, then you've been tested for AGEs. This test measures how much sugar has become stuck to the protein inside your red blood cells. The more sugar there is in your blood, the more it will attach to everything in your body, including your blood proteins. Vigilantly patrolling your brain are surveillance cells called microglia that roam their local precincts looking for disturbances, including AGEs. When microglia detect the presence of these caramelized clusters, they initiate a chain reaction of strategies to destroy them. They begin by unleashing a burst of free radicals, highly reactive oxygen compounds. Like bulls in a china shop, these reckless radicals randomly damage everything they encounter. Oxidative stress, setting off local alarms and triggering the release of proteins called inflammatory cytokines that act as SOS signals that set to work to deliberately create inflammation. Cytokines cross into the bloodstream to alert the rest of the body that the brain is under attack and instruct your whole body to temporarily adopt a new set of priorities to deal with the emergency. Their instructions will depend on the nature of the problem. So, for example, if the problem is sticky AGEs, cytokines might travel to your bone marrow to recruit white blood cells to the scene to help assist microglia in mopping them up. If the problem is a bacterial infection, cytokines might mount a fever to kill off bacteria or initiate a coordinated sickness response to make you feel tired, lose interest in activities, and stop eating. This fasting response helps your body enter a healing mode. Unless you are malnourished to begin with, eating would just divert precious energy and resources away from the emergency and delay the healing process. Regardless of the threat, once the situation is under control, healing forces will be mobilized to repair any local damage and restore the status quo. As you can see, your brain's ability to cope with AGEs and prevent them from gumming up the works depends on the deliberate creation of temporary, controlled inflammation and oxidative stress. Unfortunately, most people eat or drink refined carbohydrates with every meal and snack, generating dangerous glucose spikes inside the brain multiple times per day and even well into the evening. So AGE production rarely lets up long enough to allow healing to take place. Repeated bouts of free radical exposure can drain your brain of precious antioxidants and ignite a vicious cycle of chronic, uncontrolled inflammation and oxidative stress. It is now well established that chronic brain inflammation plays a significant role in many psychiatric disorders. The scientific evidence tying inflammation to depression is especially robust. Levels of inflammatory cytokines tend to be higher in people with mood and psychotic disorders. Researchers can even give people depression by giving them medicines that raise their inflammatory cytokine levels. Inflammatory cytokines disrupt normal production of serotonin and glutamate, key neurotransmitters involved in mood and psychotic disorders. People with depression can feel tired, stop caring about things they usually enjoy, and lose their appetite, just as people do when experiencing a sickness response. Adding anti-inflammatory medications to antidepressant medications helps some people with depression feel better. Oxidative stress also plays a role in depression, anxiety, bipolar disorder, psychosis, and neurodegenerative conditions such as Alzheimer's disease. Free radicals are dangerous no matter where they are unleashed, but if the neighborhood under attack happens to be your brain, the damage can be particularly severe. The brain doesn't produce as many antioxidant molecules as other organs do, so its capacity to extinguish free radicals is limited. To make matters worse, brain cell membranes are rich in DHA and arachidonic acid, polyunsaturated fats, PUFAs, with fragile double bonds that render them exquisitely vulnerable to oxidative damage. Refined vegetable oils. Excess glucose isn't the only instigator of damaging inflammation and oxidative stress in the brain we need to be mindful of. Other aspects of lifestyle, including smoking, vaping, and drinking alcohol, are common culprits as well. But most of us recognize these as harmful habits, so we wouldn't expect them to have brain benefits. Unfortunately, this is not the case with vegetable oil. We have long been told that vegetable oils such as soybean and sunflower oil are good for us because they're rich in essential plant PUFAs and free of saturated fat and cholesterol. But these oils are now coming under increasing scrutiny for their potential role in the decline of our mental and physical health. The slick history of vegetable oil. Unlike sugar, which could be extracted from cane by human hands with hard labor and hot water, most vegetable oils couldn't have existed before the Industrial Revolution because extracting oil from corn, grape seeds, and other seed crops and refining it into a clear, odorless substance is virtually impossible without heavy machinery and chemical engineers. As Nina Teicholz chronicles in The Big Fat Surprise, prior to the 20th century, with the exception of olive oil, which was not widely available, oils were not viewed as food. Oils weren't even considered edible. They didn't belong in the kitchen. They were used to make soaps, candles, waxes, cosmetics, varnishes, linoleum, resins, lubricants, and fuels. The first vegetable oil to be slipped into our food supply was cottonseed oil. Extracted from the agricultural waste of the cotton industry, cottonseed oil became a cheap replacement for liquid animal fats like whale oil, used in lamps and candles, and solid animal fats like lard and tallow, used in cooking. In 1908, as Teicholz goes on to describe, the Procter & Gamble company patented an industrial method for partially hydrogenating cottonseed oil, which magically transformed it from a toxic, unappealing liquid into a familiar-looking solid. The original idea at the company had been to employ this new substance to make soap, but the white or yellowish creamy product, which looked so much like lard, also suggested a food use. Finally, Procter & Gamble settled on the name Crisco, derived from its chief ingredient, crystallized cottonseed oil, Crisco. Clever marketing convinced consumers to welcome Crisco into their kitchens as a clean, modern, and affordable improvement over old-world animal fats. It wouldn't be long before corn oil was hardened into margarine as a Depression-era replacement for butter, ultimately inspiring the trendy plant-based buttery spreads of today. But liquid vegetable oils wouldn't find their way into our cupboards until the 1960s, after they were endorsed as heart-healthy by the American Heart Association, a once tiny organization that amassed scientific and political power largely fueled by funding from Procter & Gamble. Industrially refined vegetable oils like canola, from rapeseed, safflower, soybean, sunflower, corn, and grapeseed oil have now infiltrated nearly every processed food product on the market, from salad dressings to potato chips to oat milk. We've been conditioned to divide fats into saturated and unsaturated categories for so long that learning to divide them into refined and unrefined categories may take a little practice. The fats that exist naturally in any whole plant or animal food are unrefined. Examples include a fatty pork chop, an olive, or a macadamia nut. The traditional processing methods used to extract these natural fats, such as cooking pork to render lard or cold pressing olives to make extra virgin olive oil, don't change their chemical structure considerably, so rendered animal fats and cold-pressed oils are not generally considered refined. You can't, however, wrangle oil out of soybeans or sunflower seeds simply by cooking them on the stove or squeezing them with all your might. The only way to get them to part with their oils is by transporting them to an industrial oil refinery, where they will be subjected to a multi-step process requiring hexane, an explosive petroleum-based solvent. The purpose of all this is to create an odorless oil with a bland taste and increased storage stability. How to make soybean oil in 13 easy steps. Don't try this at home. Remove seed hulls, flatten beans into flakes, then pass through an industrial feed screw extruder to compress the flakes and destroy their cellular integrity. Before proceeding to the next step, decrease the atmospheric pressure in the room to reduce the risk that flammable gases will escape and explode. Next, add hexane and let the mixture percolate. Place mixture in a desolventizer and heat to 212 degrees Fahrenheit until most of the hexane has evaporated, then let cool. Air dry, then pour into a steam stripper to further concentrate the oil. To prevent unsavory deposits from forming during shipping, degum your hot oil with water and set the extracted gums aside. Important, do not discard, as these gums can later be sold to your fellow processed food manufacturers as soy lecithin. To neutralize your oil, mix with sodium hydroxide, lye, and place in a centrifuge to remove the soap that naturally forms as a byproduct. Add a natural bleaching agent such as clay, then filter to remove any soapy residues, pigments, waxes, and rancid fatty acids. To complete the refining process, place in a vacuum deodorizer and heat to at least 356 degrees Fahrenheit. Let cool, pour into bottles, and label heart-healthy plant-based vegetable oil. The linoleic acid problem. We have been sold vegetable oils because they are cheap, profitable alternatives to animal fats, not because they are good for us. One of the biggest problems with vegetable oils is that most of them are exceedingly high in linoleic acid. The table in your accompanying PDF lists the linoleic acid content of common fats. You'll notice that most vegetable oils that come from seeds, nuts, and legumes, are relatively high in linoleic acid, as high as 70% in the case of grapeseed oil, whereas most fruit oils that come from the fleshy parts of plants such as avocado oil and olive oil, are relatively low in linoleic acid at just over 10%. The fats containing the least amount of linoleic acid are coconut oil, tallow, and butter. Linoleic acid is naturally found in small quantities in a wide variety of whole plant and animal foods. So we did evolve to consume it, but only in small quantities and only as part of whole foods, not as refined liquids. Prior to the introduction of vegetable oils into our food supply, linoleic acid made up just 1 to 2% of our daily calories, whereas today, more than 7% of the calories we consume are as linoleic acid, which means we consume 3 to 6 times more linoleic acid now than we did a century ago. The result of having consumed vegetable oils in mayonnaise, salad dressings, chips, fries, margarines, and countless other ultra-processed foods for decades is that our fat cells, which are designed to store saturated fat, not polyunsaturated fat, are slowly filling up with linoleic acid. A 1968 study of members of a hunter-gatherer society living in the Pacific island nation of Tokelau found that their body fat contained less than 4% linoleic acid, and the same was true for the pigs and chickens they raised for food. By contrast, in 1959, the percentage of linoleic acid in the body fat of people living in the United States was about 9%, and by 2008, had risen to more than 21%. Among Europeans, the level was about 11% in 2015. The science in this area is still emerging, but there is growing concern among some clinicians and researchers that lining our fat coffers with linoleic acid could potentially lead to increased oxidative stress and inflammation everywhere, including inside the brain. Linoleic acid and excess inflammation. If your diet is too high in linoleic acid, you may have more trouble making the omega-3 fatty acids EPA and DHA, which could make you more prone to chronic inflammation. Remember, DHA helps resolve inflammation in the brain, and EPA helps resolve inflammation in the rest of the body. You may not need to worry about this if your diet contains adequate amounts of EPA and DHA, but unfortunately, not only have we been consuming far more linoleic acid than ever before, but we have also been consuming far less EPA and DHA. DHA and EPA are much harder to find in modern diets than linoleic acid because they don't exist in plant foods at all. And many of the animal foods that contain them in significant amounts, such as shellfish, fatty fish, grass-fed liver, and pastured egg yolk, have fallen out of favor. It is estimated that prior to the dawn of agriculture, our diets contained a much better balance between omega-3 and omega-6 fatty acids, roughly equal amounts of each, or perhaps no more than twice as much omega-6 as omega-3. Whereas today, most of us consume at least 20 times more omega-6 than omega-3, shifting our entire system toward inflammation and away from healing. Mental health researchers have conducted numerous studies trying to correct this imbalance by increasing the amount of omega-3 in the diet, usually with fish oil supplements, often with disappointing results. It is surprisingly rare for scientists to approach the imbalance by reducing the amount of omega-6. But researchers at the National Institutes of Health found that while increasing the amount of omega-3 in the diet to 1.5 grams per day for 16 weeks did improve migraine symptoms, if they also reduced the amount of linoleic acid in the diet from 7% to less than 1.8% of calories, migraine symptoms improved even more. Linoleic acid and oxidative stress. Linoleic acid is easily damaged by oxidative stress and has a tendency to decompose into toxic byproducts known as oxalams, oxidized linoleic acid metabolites. There is some research suggesting that oxalams may play a role in physical health problems such as heart disease, fatty liver disease, and obesity. And although oxalams form in the brain as well, they don't appear to accumulate in the brain to any significant extent. However, this doesn't necessarily mean that high linoleic acid diets are safe for our mental health. The brain absorbs linoleic acid just as easily as it absorbs any other PUFA, but it handles it very differently. Instead of tucking it all neatly into brain cell membranes, as it does with other PUFAs, or turning it into arachidonic acid, which is why we're told we need to consume it in the first place, the brain recycles some incoming linoleic acid into other molecules, but it burns most of it for energy. This takes place in glial cells because most neurons can't burn fatty acids at all. We can only speculate as to why the brain would choose to burn linoleic acid for energy, but it certainly is puzzling and potentially quite concerning. The brain generally prefers to burn other fuels such as glucose and ketones over fatty acids because burning fatty acids generates many more oxygen radicals, which increases oxidative stress inside the brain. In a thoughtfully designed study published in 2022, scientists at Wake Forest University observed that people with Alzheimer's disease had linoleic acid blood levels 56% higher than people without cognitive impairment. And the higher the levels were, the less energy their white blood cells were able to produce. These researchers speculated that if excess linoleic acid also hampers the ability of brain cells to produce energy, it could directly contribute to the development of dementia and other mental health problems. But they haven't tested this hypothesis yet. We still have a lot to learn about linoleic acid, but the information we already have available should give us pause. If you share this concern, you have nothing to lose and potentially a great deal to gain by removing these industrially refined oils from your diet. In fact, even though linoleic acid has long been considered an essential PUFA, this view is no longer supported by the science. So long as your diet contains adequate arachidonic acid, which comes from animal foods, you don't need to consume any linoleic acid at all. Inflammation, oxidative stress, and neurotransmitter imbalances. The increased inflammation and oxidative stress caused by refined carbohydrates and vegetable oils can also contribute to psychiatric problems by throwing your neurotransmitters out of balance. The very same neurotransmitters that most psychiatric medicines are designed to target. Let's take a closer look at how inflammation and oxidative stress change the way your brain uses tryptophan, an essential amino acid that comes from dietary protein. Under normal circumstances, your brain uses some of the tryptophan it absorbs to make serotonin, a neurotransmitter which helps regulate mood, sleep, and appetite, among many other things, and melatonin, a hormone that helps regulate sleep. The rest of the tryptophan gets directed to the kynurenine pathway, where it's used to regulate the production of other neurotransmitters, including glutamate and GABA. Glutamate is the brain's primary stimulating neurotransmitter, and GABA is the brain's primary relaxing neurotransmitter. You can think of glutamate as the brain's gas pedal and GABA as the brain's brake pedal. Glutamate and GABA are the most abundant and widespread neurotransmitters in the brain, and the balance between the two essentially determines your brain's overall activity level at any given point in time. When your tryptophan system is in healthy balance, you will feel calm without being sleepy and focused without being obsessive. Excessive inflammation and oxidative stress disrupt this peaceful state and shift your brain into crisis mode by stealing some tryptophan away from the serotonin-melatonin pathway and directing it down the inflammatory branch of the kynurenine pathway. The result of this shift is less serotonin, less melatonin, more dopamine, less GABA, and up to 100 times more glutamate. If inflammation and oxidative stress persist, they will lead to glutamate excitotoxicity, dangerously high glutamate levels that attack proteins, membranes, DNA, and mitochondria throughout the brain, resulting in widespread structural damage. Glutamate imbalances are a feature of many psychiatric disorders, including depression, bipolar disorder, schizophrenia, obsessive-compulsive disorder, and Alzheimer's disease. You can find diagrams of the balanced and unbalanced kynurenine pathways in the accompanying PDF. What's standing in your way? The single most important change you can make to your diet to protect your brain from damaging inflammation and oxidative stress is to avoid refined carbohydrates and vegetable oils, which starts with eliminating ultra-processed foods. It's easy to see why we should stop eating these things, but hard to imagine life without them. Most of us grew up on these intensely flavored, convenient products, and they're designed by chemical engineers to be biologically irresistible. In his book, The End of Overeating, former FDA Commissioner Dr. David Kessler interviewed a leading food industry consultant who told him that the food industry intentionally designs products to hit the 3 points of the compass. Sugar, fat, and salt make a food compelling. They make it indulgent. They make it high in hedonic value, which gives us pleasure. We try to bring as much of that into the equation as possible. Researchers know that ultra-processed foods are addictive, and marketing executives shamelessly pitch them to us as exactly that, as if this property is a plus, with slogans like, "Bet you can't eat just one," and "Once you pop, you can't stop." Food should nourish and satisfy you, not leave you feeling empty, desperate, and out of control. These emotions are the hallmarks of an unhealthy relationship. Tips for reducing inflammation and oxidative stress. Read ingredient labels. It's easy to recognize chips and ice cream as junk food, but it can be harder to spot junk foods when they're dressed up as health foods because they're so often marketed to us based on what they do not contain. fat-free salad dressings, sugar-free puddings, dairy-free yogurts, gluten-free cookies, cholesterol-free burgers, etc. It's not enough to know what's not in your food. You need to know what's in it. Keep your eye upon the donut and not upon the hole. There's no substitute for turning the package over and reading the ingredient label. Cook at home. Most restaurants, from fast food joints to fine dining establishments, often proudly use vegetable oils. So home cooking is always best. But you'll need to clean out your pantry first. If you're like most people, you probably have sugar, flour, and vegetable oil in your pantry. Nutrition policymakers around the world continue to recommend that we consume 2 to 10% of our daily calories as linoleic acid. This advice is illogical because linoleic acid is not an essential fatty acid, but even if it were, unless you have been stranded on a deserted island without access to modern foods for many years, chances are excellent that you have already accumulated enough linoleic acid to last you a good long while. If you were somehow able to eliminate all linoleic acid from your diet, it would take about 680 days to use up just half of what you've stored. But don't let that discourage you. The sooner you begin, the sooner you will get there. Remember, appropriately small amounts of linoleic acid exist naturally in a wide variety of whole plant and animal foods. So the chances of your developing a linoleic acid deficiency are vanishingly small. In the meantime, take comfort in the fact that our capacity to store excess carbohydrate is so small that most people can normalize and stabilize their blood sugar levels within a matter of days by switching to a low-carbohydrate diet. And if you do, chances are excellent that you will be rewarded with less inflammation. In 2022, researchers at the University of Sydney reviewed 63 low-carbohydrate clinical trials in humans and found that levels of inflammatory molecules in the blood went down in 44 of these studies, a robust success rate of 71%. If low-carbohydrate diets aren't your cup of tea, take heart. You can make just about any dietary pattern less inflammatory by avoiding refined carbohydrates. Practicing whole food principles may seem like a daunting task, but your good mental health is well worth the effort. In Chapter 16, I'll give you tools and resources to help you practice eating in a whole new way.